Thank you all for joining us today. This is our second talk for the HKBIA online series. When venues start opening up, hopefully we can do these series in person. 2021 has been very busy for our association. We're looking at hosting a boat show in Hong Kong in the very near future, so stay tuned for that. We also recently completed quite an extensive industry report that is to be sent to various government departments, which include the Policy and Innovation Coordination Office, which reports directly to the Chief Executive. We'll send this out to members as well. So this will be on our members only webpage, so you can access it. We also recently had quite a few new members that have joined. So I'd like to thank them for supporting us. And for those that are in Hong Kong and are interested, the Marine Police are hosting a sea safety seminar specifically for fire precaution awareness, especially right after the Aberdeen fire. So if you're interested in joining, we will send information out to all of you. So back to the reason why we're all here today. First, Simon, for giving us this talk about the Low Impact Boating Initiative. Perhaps I'll just give a brief background for those that don't know Simon. Simon comes from an IT engineering background with over 50 years of boating experience. He, with Louise Connolly and his brother, Nic Boyde, established Storm Force Ltd in 2005, which is now Hong Kong's largest distributors for fittings and technical products for small commercial vessels and for the leisure marine industry. Simon was the founding chair of the HKBIA and has now left Storm Force Marine and resides principally in the UK. He operates an independent consultant to the marine industry and designs boats. The Low Impact Boating Initiative paper seeks to introduce multiple measures to reduce the immediate environmental impact in the build and operation of leisure marine vessels. LIBI, in short, is a new framework to address areas in which the worldwide leisure marine industry, from paddleboards all the way to superyachts, can work together to reduce the environmental impact of our industry. With all environmental factors that occur today, like the end of life crisis that is looming for all of us, especially for the end of life boats crisis. The Low Impact Boating Initiative provides a new perspective on how boats can be designed for a sustainable future. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it on to Simon.
Thank you, Lawrence. I was the principal author of this, but Lawrence himself had a major impact, as did Louise Connolly, and another friend of ours, in fact, Chris Maiden, who's not part of the boating industry, but thinks good thoughts about the environment. And when we first started looking at this whole process a few years ago, it became quite clear that a lot of what people are attempting to actually deliver in terms of reducing the impact of the marine industry on the environment is end user campaign stuff. So banning the use of straws, the use of water bottles in waterside restaurants and things like that. The reality is that these are consumer campaigns designed to raise awareness for such consumer initiatives. And they've been very successful in changing the worldwide opinion. Now, there's most people in the developed world, I think, are reasonably convinced that there is a significant probability of humans contributing to significant climate warming. And it's understood that we all have to do something to try and reduce this impact. What hasn't happened yet in the marine industry, pretty much anywhere in the world, at least not in the leisure marine industry, is anyone really looking at how we reduce the impact of us, the industry, as opposed to the people who might buy our boats or the people who might use the bar beside the water. I'm not really sure why this has never really been addressed. What's quite clear is that commercial maritime has been looking at this route via the International Maritime Organization, which is the worldwide UN body which governs what happens on the water everywhere in the world. They've been looking at this in some detail really for 15 to 20 years, including already some of the large operators have been ordering vessels which will run off ammonia. When you burn ammonia in an internal combustion engine, it emits no greenhouse gases because there's no carbon in ammonia. There's multiple other issues with it, which makes it a very hard chemical to use. But this type of mass environmental difference which the industry can make has really not been looked at with us. About 4 years ago, I visited METS and I caught some of the talks they had on. So the Marine Equipment Trade Show is the big industry get together where there's no boats on sale, but all the equipment, all the fittings, all the preparations, all the paint, all the materials you might use to build a boat is all shown to the industry. What was quite apparent from the actual people who were put up on stage to comment about this was that all of them were involved in the superyacht industry, but the superyacht industry, while it has a very high value contribution to the leisure marine industry worldwide, actually has a very low contribution in terms of numbers of boats worldwide, because they're really expensive and quite big. It's self-evident why. And again, very curious that no one's looking at it. And the reason why is, of course, this. It's quite simple. No one has seen a way where we can actually build boats, run an industry in a green way. Hence, thinking these thoughts, I was looking at the same time at building riverboats. So what we could actually do in terms of changing this over to a campaign which the industry could actually get behind to use for itself. So our problem is that we all have energy intensive lifestyles, and as time goes on, those people around the world who don't have an energy intensive lifestyle are going to adopt one, and why shouldn't they? It isn't reserved for the rich. We as Leisure Marine, we've always fought against regulation. We've always sought exemptions for fuel use, for emissions. We've tried to use materials which minimize the length of time to build a boat, maximize the beauty of a boat, maximize its marketing ability. And we've not really ever looked at this in terms of what effect these materials could have on the environment during the build, while the boat's been operated, and of course, once the boat gets to the end of its life cycle. And this is what we sought to rectify by producing this paper. So, whereas I touched on these in public environmental campaigns, stopping use of straws and let's stop using water bottles and stuff, in terms of internal industry campaigns, we really need to focus on reductions in the waste which we generate while we build boats, CO2 emissions and energy consumption while the boat is in operation. And we also have to think about what's going to happen to the boat and the materials the boat is built out of after we finish building the boat. None of these are being addressed at the moment, unfortunately. I still have not seen any evidence of this. Once we've worked out what we need to do, we then need to work out how we can actually sell this to our customers so that a boat made out of recyclable materials is desirable to a customer, and the customer immediately spots that this boat built out of recyclable materials looks nothing like the boat that we used to build, and therefore it is more desirable to have this new style boat run the old style boat. So we increase our industry while reducing the impact of our industry, and this is quite critical to understand. We need to plan these. Maybe we need to have individual boating industry associations around the world signing up to an international convention. We need to make sure real changes are made. we need a real impact if we're going to join in with the rest of the world. We can't just do the greenwashing. Banning plastic straws is nearly irrelevant, and I don't know why people are focused on it in so many places. We have to develop a low impact build process and a low impact product. And I can see no option, because if we don't develop it ourselves, it will be done for us. So we look at different areas. The first thing we can look at is very simple. For many boat owners, speed is a key. And we see this in sailing boats, we see this in motorboats. But actually, for a lot of other boat owners, and probably a majority of boat owners, once they've got over the pissing competition of, my engine's bigger than your engine, my sails are bigger than your sails, my mooring costs more than your mooring because my boat's larger. Once you've got over that step, actually, for most boat owners, spending time on the boat is the key thing. So perhaps we need to stop marketing speed and start marketing speed options. So we do a boat, we make sure this boat is entirely able to operate with a small engine, with a big engine, with a small air conditioner, with a big air conditioner. We should give multiple powering options for the boat. By all means, advertise and sell that 65-foot boat capable of doing 45 knots. That's what we advertise. What we actually sell is that 65-foot boat doing 15 knots, because we can do that at half the price, but visually it looks the same. That's the first and obvious step. Make sure people can buy a smaller engine. The next thing is to actually look at how we design boats. So Dave Caston, who's a pretty famous American designer, he, amongst others, pointed out that we may have made a major design mistake, a major change in orientation in our industry in the early 70s. In the early 70s, just as fuel prices started to go up, people suddenly started building boats which needed a huge amount of fuel to use them. And generally what happened is that boats got fatter. So we decided to get more space on a boat because we could sell that. But rather than doing the old thing of creating space by increasing length, we decided to get more space by increasing width. And if you look, for example, at modern designs from Beneteau, I was talking just the other night with Guy Noel, and he says he's just been on a couple of these boats and seen just how wide they're getting. We should try and make sure that a long, thin boat, which in the naval architectural basis is always cheaper to drive. It always takes less fuel. We should try and make sure the cost of ownership of that boat is no different from the short, fat boat. In short, we should make sure that our license for a boat, our mooring cost for a boat, our insurance for a boat depends upon a simple equation like length times width, as opposed to just length. And at the moment, it's overwhelmingly just length. And we should try and make sure that we get rid of that problem, where we're actually, by mistake, we've encouraged less efficient boats, because that was never the intention of the length rules. Then we should be looking at the boats which we have built. How do we reduce their energy consumption? Well, one of the first things to do would be just to make sure that the insides of the boats are insulated. Almost no boats are insulated. It's very curious. They've got a hull on the outside. They have got an interior, but very, very little effort is made sure to make sure that any heating system or cooling system on board runs as efficiently as possible. Now, we're all used to this in Hong Kong, because that's what happens with all housing in Hong Kong. Housing here is not insulated. Hong Kong has no mandatory requirement for double glazed windows, which in Europe, of course, you've not been allowed to fit a window for some years, which isn't double glazed, except on boats you are. So almost all boats in Europe are built with single glazed windows. Why? Why don't we insist on double glazed windows? Therefore, any heating or cooling we do on the boat is dramatically more efficient. The checks which I did when I did a recent boat design suggest that something like 60 to 70% of the heat when you're heating a boat, and believe me, that means 60 to 70% of the energy spent on cooling when you're cooling a boat, is lost through windows. It is that high. Okay, in Hong Kong, we don't have these laws, but in many countries, we have laws about requiring double glazed windows. We should make this a requirement for boats. And this will make sure that boat windows, which are double glazed, are quite cheap because it creates a mass market. Another really good thing we could do, again, this isn't really a Hong Kong market thing, but it's definitely a European American market thing. Well, all these boats which we're building, they've all got engines. All these engines are water cooled, and we take this excess heat from the engine and we dump it in the sea. What we should be doing is taking the heat from the engine and using it to heat the boat, heat scavenging. So these systems have existed, and these aren't unknown, and they've been done for more than 100 years. But it's almost unknown for this to happen on a production boat. And in fact, there's almost no standard text on it. The last standard text I found, which mentioned how you might design a heat scavenging system, was written in 1957. Again, cheap fuel has stopped us trying to be efficient with the fuel which we had on board the boat. So we should try and make sure we take that heat, excess heat from the engine, and before we dump it into the sea, pump it around the boat and heat the boat up, rather than running a separate boat heating system. Cooling. In modern households, I think a lot of us would have bought these new split type air conditioning systems. These are very good. These allow us to run the compressor at multiple speeds, so that once we pump the house down, once it's got cool enough, we run the compressor at a much slower speed, and that maintains the temperature. These are sold as inverter systems because they take AC power, they create DC power from it, and then they create AC power from that DC power. And they alter the speed of the compressor by changing the frequency of the AC signal they regenerate to the compressor. So they're called inverter systems, which is very confusing because it's not what we call an inverter on a boat. What it does mean, these systems, is they're much more efficient. Typically, they consume 30 to 40% less power than compressor systems, where we just switch the compressor on or off. These are available from at least 2 manufacturers now, and I'm sure others will develop them. The difficulty for getting these approved for boat systems is, on a boat, we always have a problem with the dumping the electrical interference, which we get from these, the radio interference, the EMF. But 2 manufacturers, both Webasto and Friggamire, have achieved this, and I'm sure Dometic are working on it, and the other guys will get there as well. These should definitely be encouraged, and we should be selecting these for our boats. Next thing, this is bizarre. So a major Hong Kong builder, there we go, which is very old, you should be able to identify that company. They told me a few months ago that they doubled the size of the gensets they're putting on their boats, because now the owners they're selling to, primarily in America, weren't satisfied with getting an 80-foot boat with 2 64 kilowatt gensets on board. So they've ramped them up to 2 115 kilowatt gensets. This is ludicrous. These gensets will never be asked to deliver more than about 10% of their power. A real focus on reducing genset size on boats, making sure that they're appropriately sized, the gensets are installed with inverter chargers so we get a balanced power system. Because when we're running a genset, we really want to run it at quite a high load, because otherwise we're spending most of our money on the genset turning over as opposed to the genset producing power. There's a set of rules which all boat builders pretty much around the world operate from. They might be referred to it as Recreational Craft Directive, or you might refer to it as ABYC, or you might refer to it as the Australian Standard Rules. But actually, they're all based upon ISO standards. The TC 188 committee is chaired by Sweden. Most of the contributions come from the US and the UK. And it's a set of ISO standards which can be taken by individual states or trade groups and applied as standards to be used as their domestic standard for boats. So we just got these adopted by Hong Kong, for example. We could just say that when a boat is built by a builder, there's a peak energy requirement, and thus we could limit the genset size. That we could put it in the standard, boat builders could adopt it, and probably with a sigh of relief, because they get more space on the boat because they don't have to put a big genset on, they don't have such big fuel tanks on. It's just there's nothing to say they shouldn't go for the maximum size genset you could get on board the boat, irrespective of whether you're going to use the power. This is frequently misunderstood, and most gensets are wildly oversized. We've got no renewables requirements in any of our boat building standards at the moment. So, whereas when we build a house, most countries of the world, there's a method whereby we get some contribution from the government to put solar panels and things on. On boats, it's just not there. It's never considered. Again, to that same ISO standard set, we could have a renewable energy requirement. We could say for a boat of this size, this many people, this speed, this weight, this area, however we want to define it, we could say that you have to have a minimum amount of solar power on board, or we compare solar power to engine size or solar power to sail size, depending on the type of boat. And we could say you've got to have a minimum of 20 watts per meter or 5 watts per square meter of boat renewable energy generation. This could be done from a windmill, it could be done from solar, it could be done via towables. In the case of a sailing boat, please don't put towable generators on a motorboat because this is completely stupid, of course. Again, this could be a standard, it could be an optional standard, but if it's there, you'd be amazed how many boat builders might be interested in adopting it. CO2 emissions. So I bought a car today in the UK, even though I'm still in Hong Kong. And car tax in the UK is based not on how expensive the car was, or if it's red, or if the government likes it. It's based upon how many grams of carbon it emits per kilometre travelled. And if your car gets below 100 grams of carbon per kilometre travelled, there's no car tax at all in the UK. So basically, administrative authorities in the UK and in Europe and in other countries, they're saying we're going to tax carbon as opposed to tax miles. We could do something similar to a boat. We could create a standard where when you sell a boat, you have to state how many grams of CO2 are emitted, say, per kilowatt capacity of gensets or kilowatt capacity of engines or horsepower of engines. And then we could literally, when they've got a very simple way to compare two boats. It emits more CO2 than that one. It's in the standard. And we don't say you have to build it to a small standard, to a low level. That's for a national government to legislate. But we do say there's a standard way of comparing boats. And my boat emits less CO2 than your boat. It said so on the certificate. Now, we're used to this when we buy fridges in Hong Kong. We could do this with boats anywhere in the world. That would be a very simple thing to do because all this information is there already from the genset and engine manufacturers. Then we come on to the big thing. Now, back in the day, boats were built out of wood. Then boats were built out of iron and wood. Then boats were built out of steel and wood. Then steel only. And then steel with concrete, which was indeed a disaster, but there we go. And now we're building boat out of composites. Now, these are, got to be quite clear, these are thermoset composites. What we mean is we mix two chemicals together and we get a solid, and we cannot undo that process. It's a one-way equation, chemical equation. Other types of plastics, we are able to heat set, then we can heat it up again and bend it to a different shape. So those types of plastics we can reuse in different places. So for example, if you might have seen there's some companies which advertise speedboats or especially beach access boats with ramps, which are made out of high density polyethylene, HDPE. And those boats, you can recycle all of those plastics because we can take those plastics and we can bend them to a different shape. But thermoset plastics, you know, GRP, carbon fiber reinforced plastics, carbon Kevlar, all of these things, I'm afraid, once we built the boat and we set the shape, the only way we can change that shape is with a saw. And what actually happens is when these boats get to the end of their life, The only practical recycling method is a pyro-incinerator. So we basically heat the thing up by burning even more fuel up to about 1500 degrees centigrade or higher to create an ash which you can add to concrete to make it weaker. That is the proposed recycling method. Now, other people have come up with, well, we've got this special type of fiber I can use with my special green source type of plastic. And if you add my special chemical to it, then we could break this plastic down into something which we can incinerate and we can take the fiber out. But this presupposes that the boat, when it gets to the end of its life, is in a place where it's got a recycling facility, it's got the special chemicals, the yard can afford, which built the boat has the special chemicals. And so we end up with this idea that we can recycle new boats, but we don't have this system whereby we can recycle old boats, because when a boat gets old, it's no longer normally in a rich environment. It's normally gone to a much poorer environment as the price goes down over time. And for example, boats in Hong Kong where they get secondhand, or a lot of secondhand boats here have ended up going down to Philippines, for example, once they get old enough. And down in the Philippines, if you're down in the southern Philippines, are you really going to have access to their special chemicals to deconstruct a hull? Well, you're not. So to my mind, saying that a practical recycling method which uses an external chemical is possible, it ignores a human problem, which is the boat's not going to be where the chemical is. So in fact, what happens is the boat gets carved up or sunk, stuck in the landfill, and either way, its chemicals gradually leach out into the water. So we actually need to start building boats out of things which can be economically recycled in situ anywhere in the world, which means at the moment, wood, steel, aluminium. All of these materials can be recovered, reused anywhere in the world. There's still no problems with them at all. They think, for example, that of all the iron ever mined, 70% of it is still in use because it gets melted down for scrap and reused, melted down and reused. Aluminium, the figure's thought to be about 85%. So as a material, it's been in use for less long. In terms of reinforced thermoset composites, there's no reuse at all. So if it's not new, it's not being done. Problem is if we're building stuff out of these sheet materials where we can't mold them so easily, well, they're going to look a little bit different. We aren't going to have those expensive double curvature shapes, because there's double curvature shapes which are possible, of course, in these plate materials, are much, much more expensive to develop in those materials than they are when we can just paint it on with a paintbrush, which is what we do with thermoset plastics effectively. But this means that we start promoting new hull shapes. We start running design competitions where we start making hull shapes which are attractive out of steel, out of aluminium, out of wood. And therefore we do create hulls which can be recycled in situ. There's other people who are saying we can do a type of recycling which is open loop, whereby we can take our old boat hull or the contents of it, and we can use it outside the boat industry for a different purpose, including I saw one talk at Metz which said we could take these boats, strip out the insides, invert them, put them on posts and use them as roofs for houses. Man, this isn't a good idea at all, really. And it's very, very artificial, and it's called a stunt, of course, because who wants to live in a house with a boat hull as a roof? It's going to be quite a small house when you think about it. And it's going to blow off in a storm because it's perfectly shaped to take off an upturned boat hull. So such open loop methods are very problematic for any industry to adopt. An industry should be brave enough to say, we build out of these materials, we'll reuse the same materials in our future boats. I see no reason why we shouldn't do that. We've also got a concept of reuse. Now, it's quite hard. A lot of fiberglass boats, composite boats, you find that their hull material, the stiffness is lost after around 30 years. And because of the way the boat is constructed, we can't actually repair the hull. An inner shell is bonded onto an outer shell, and there's no way to separate them without being destructive. So again, we could add something to the TC188 design set requiring boats to be able to be dismantled. For example, in the UK and the EU, I think both just recently came in a right to repair. This is going to have an effect on boat design. If you have to be able to pull a new electrical cable through your boat, well, then the designers are going to have to alter this. It's a really good talk by a guy at one of the Mets talks 3 years ago, who said, look, any of the big super yacht builders, plus any of the guys who are doing the long runs of production boats at builders like Beneteau, Hansa, etc., all of these guys could spend 3 more weeks designing the boats for a trivial amount of cost compared to actually building the boats in the first place, and actually make it possible for boats to be able to be dismantled or partly dismantled so they can be properly repaired. We could also go one step further than this, and we could actually develop a set of standards permitting an old hull to be used on a new boat and say the boat is new. That's going to need some thought about how we could do that, but it is certainly possible. We know this is possible because the EU made this mandatory for cars about 20 years ago. Any car over 10 years old in the EU and the UK, the manufacturer has to take it back for nothing and dismantle the car. They're not even allowed to scrap it. It's a requirement in law. We could also do a lot to actually redevelop and reuse old hulls if we could get to the designs. Now, a boat builder has to, under the RCD in Europe, for example, hold designs of boats for 10 years. But after 10 years, they've got no need to hold them. And in fact, my old boat in Hong Kong, Beneteau didn't keep the designs after they expired. So I contacted the designer. They chucked the original designs away because they didn't want them anymore. We could, in terms of ICOMIA, for example, set up a registry whereby as soon as your design's gone to 10 years, the design files go to the registry so they're accessible, not necessarily for free, but people can get to them so they can find out how the boat was originally put together. These are small things which can make it much easier to reuse old boats. Single-use plastics. There's been a lot of stuff about single-use plastics. Hong Kong Yacht Club, please don't bring single-use plastics. No straws on us. We don't want any of those evil water bottles. Funny, really, because you should actually look what the boatyard does, which is right next door in the Royal Hong Kong Yacht Club. Look at the packaging chucked away by their restaurant. Look at the packaging chucked away in the ship shop. Frankly, the consumers don't know the amount of packaging which gets disposed of before they see a product when they buy it. In boat building, we typically wrap boats. In the US and other very cold climates, every winter they wrap boats. And that wrapping is just chucked away each year. The builder wraps the boat. It gets chucked away after the boat gets delivered. You know, we didn't used to do this. Even 20 years ago, this wasn't done. We used tarpaulins, and we used to ship the tarpaulins back to the boat builder. It'd be a very, very simple thing to make mandatory. We banned the wrapping of boats, and then builders will use tarpaulins again. It wasn't cheaper to use wrapping. You just didn't have to take it back. That was all. Again, a small change, almost no cost to it. What about with legal and contracts? So I touched on this in terms of mooring fees and licensing, that we've made a legal position whereby our license to permit us to drive a boat depends on the boat length as opposed to the boat's maximum area it takes up. In other legal contracts, there's other things which have been put in there designed to protect the purchaser, but they can have an unintentional adverse effect, which isn't obvious at all. But this is because the purchaser's got the right to make a late change in a boat design or in its equipment. What it means is that these late changes result in the equipment being ordered as late as possible, so the boat builder doesn't have to try and send it back or just always loses their money. And therefore, much of the optional equipment on a boat ends up being transported to the boat builder in the worst way possible. I mean, at Storm Force Marine, when we ran it, we flew fridges from Italy to get put on a boat in China. This is wrong. It should come by sea, and the fridge should be ordered much earlier. This is very important. But it also means we have to rejig warranty terms. So there's still quite a lot of manufacturers who don't state the warranty from the handover date of a new build boat to a customer. They state the warranty on the date of when the equipment left the manufacturer. Again, if we rejig the warranty and say it must be from installation date, not from manufacturing date, or the warranty is multiple years anyway, again, we can encourage, therefore, builders to be able to order earlier, distributors to hold stock for earlier, because then they're not selling out of warranty product. I remember one point we actually sold some lights to a builder in China, so it's quite a few years ago. And by the time the builder got around to fitting the lights, they were out of warranty, and some of the lights had got rusty in store. And we just had to pay for them as a company, because the boat builder said we haven't even used them yet. We never bought lights from that manufacturer again, but you can see the problem. And again, a small thing, we could mandate this in law. All sorts of warranties are now mandated in law for other things. We could do this for components as well, and there's no reason why we shouldn't. Water pollution. Much of the developed world has laws preventing sewage discharge in inshore waters within 12 miles of the coast. Hong Kong does as well, by the way, but it only has it for convention vessels, say vessels over 500 tons on an international voyage. Ferries, Macau ferries, they're not allowed to discharge sewage. Ferries in Hong Kong waters, they are, because they're not on an international voyage. All of our boats, well, you can't build a boat in Europe anymore, and I'm pretty sure the US is pretty much the same, which doesn't have sewage tanks. So all these boats come into Hong Kong with sewage tanks, and we don't do anything with them. We just pump the shit straight into the water. Obviously, as an industry association in Hong Kong, we should be going to the Marine Department saying, we don't care how much you don't want to do this. You've got to put in treatment works in every major marina so stuff can be pumped out into you. But that's just sewage. On a worldwide scale, why aren't we mandating grease traps at galley sinks? These are mandatory for commercial vessels to make sure that cooking oils and stuff don't go into the sea. All commercial vessels have to have oily water separators. And for smaller vessels in most of the world, look, and this includes Egypt, I happen to know, they've got to have bilge water filters on leisure boats in Egypt to make sure they don't discharge dirty oil-containing bilge water into the sea. These bilge water filters are available. There is a standard for bilge water filters. There are multiple manufacturers. We in Hong Kong could easily say to Marine Department, we should do this. And as an industry, we're going to make money out of it. It makes the boat a little bit more expensive. There's the refit market and everything else. And why aren't we doing this? And we should be doing this. What about using marine engines which actually have dry stack exhausts? Therefore, we no longer inject water into the exhaust system. Dry stack exhausts, again, are very, very common on commercial vessels. And it's only leisure marine vessels where we've done this water injected, because it lets us cheat a bit in how we design the boat, because we can cool the exhaust manifold down with raw water. But there are other ways to do this, and we could actually make engines which are used in all leisure marine boats with dry stack exhaust, and we could do this safely. Again, it just needs a law change, and then we're no longer injecting hot particles, diesel particles, directly into the water. And also, we're no longer wearing out, as a result, exhaust manifolds, which, as everyone knows, seem to last about 5 minutes in Hong Kong. Air pollution. Well, our fuels at the moment are overwhelmingly diesel and petrol. Obviously, in other environments where, if we're talking about day boats, lake boats, or river or canal boats, we could say, look, we're going to go electric, because it's reasonably easy to say you've only got an hour of power electrical drive system because you only use it to go in and out of the marina. You can recharge from multiple shore-based places. But when we're actually talking about boats which go offshore, we have no alternative at the moment, though things are being investigated. Because if we are coming back from the Philippines, we're a bad skipper if we don't plan to motor for 4 days to come back. We've made an error. We don't want to get caught out in there and have a longer trip than absolutely necessary when we're delivering a boat, because we increase a lot of risk to the people on board because there's time for a typhoon to blow up. So we need to think about what fuels we could use in our boats, which would have a lower impact. Without practical ammonia-based engines being developed, I think that's a long way off to ever to come down to our size of engines, and more than 5 years away. And I'm afraid those people who are believing in the hydrogen fuel cell type engines, they've always, since the 1960s, they're always going to be commercially practical in 5 years' time. And, you know, here we are in 2021, and again, they're going to be commercially practical in 5 years' time. And I'm reasonably sure that they're never going to be commercially practical. Methanol-based fuel cells may be straight hydrogen tricky, even though the EU has just recently announced plans to spend a major amount of money on it. No one has ever built small ones which are affordable. They're way, way out of price. But we could do this with hydrotreated vegetable oils. We have to think very carefully how we're generating them. We shouldn't be using palm. Obviously, we should be trying to build these out of microbe-based types of areas. But these hydrotreated vegetable oils have a much higher CO2 output, very clean burning, because there's far, far fewer chemicals in their original structure. And most new diesel engines, and very curiously, all really old diesel engines can burn these fuels. And we are able to actually take this fuel from other sources. As leisure marine, we can afford to buy more expensive fuel. We can afford to put more efficient engines in. We're not running a business where we have to do this. So we could actually start insisting on HVO fuel for leisure marine vessels. And we could dye it green or something to make sure that we always know that this is what leisure marine is using. My point about this whole paper is we are the problem. We have to recognize that our activities in the industry are the problem. We ordering a fridge late is a problem. Us not persuading a customer to take a smaller genset is a problem. Us not bothering to sell that more expensive air conditioner, which actually burns 50% less fuel. It's our problem. It's not the supplier's problem. It's not the customer's problem. I was asked a few years ago by a friend who wanted to import little solar panels to sell to recharge phones in Hong Kong. She wanted to be green. And so I said to her, the best thing you can do in Hong Kong if you want to be green is buy a one-way ticket on an aeroplane and never come back. But people do live here. And what should we do is recognize that we are both the problem and we're also the solution as the industry. We must make sure we're promoting things which simply just take less energy to run. We don't have to go for foiling boats. We don't have to ban plastic bottles. There are much bigger things we could do. We could create awards. We can make sure if we're boat importers, we bring in boats which really are recyclable, not recyclable in a maybe with a future plot. All of this is possible for us to do right now. So the idea was to rate yourself, your business, your product, so a LIBI rate, and hence the pun on liberate yourself as well. Unfortunately, when I took this through and I presented this to the Environmental Committee of HKBIA, to say it went down like a bucket of sick at a wedding was actually sort of probably quite accurate. And what the Environmental Committee of HKBIA have actually come out with is yet another consumer campaign to ban straws and plastic bottles in marinas. Oh, and we're going to make boats out of recyclable materials, but the special chemical route, recycling it in the future. And to me, this is still a refusal to recognize that the industry is the problem and the industry is the solution. And In fact, what's actually happened is a bunch of greenwashing. And to me, that was very disappointing because this could have been taken further. And unfortunately, presenting this paper to ICOMIA, not much happened. Very few people even read it, which is a shame. But we could do something. We could do something here, and we could carry on shouting about this internationally. There we go. That's the Low Impact Boating Initiative. I'm very happy to take any questions or abuse that people wish to deliver to me.
Very good presentation. Thanks, Simon. Yeah, lots of stuff in there that need money to develop.
Sure, a lot of stuff in there which needs no money at all. It's already been developed. I mean, most of this is design stuff. It's not production cost. I mean, persuading someone that a developable hull shape is attractive is a marketing game. I'm sure it's no more expensive than marketing some boats with windows in the hulls, which is the current fashion. This can be done. We could go for plumb bows, axe bows. We can make some very, very simple and quite effective shapes. You know this. You've worked with this sort of stuff for many years. All we have to do is persuade people they want to do it.
Unfortunately, I mean, the bulk of the smaller yachts, the non-super yachts, seem to be priced more around, valued more around price than any design feature. I mean, that's where the competition is. That's where builders offer the cheapest option and then pile on the realistic bits into the boats afterwards. So clearly they consider the market to be financially driven, or their markets, and they are the biggest dealer.
And I think you're quite right, but there's a very interesting thing here. So when my grandfather, got a boat built, and it was a converted lifeboat after the end of World War II, and the approximate cost of getting that boat converted and everything else was about 2 years' salary for a private doctor. And he did indeed. He ended up with a 30-foot piece of shit, but apparently the family loved it. I mean, I remember one hellish journey on it and nothing else myself, because it really was really quite foul. As you can imagine, when you convert a lifeboat and put a rig on it and go sailing on the North Sea. Anyway, I was only 4, maybe it was better. But the comparative value of the boat has gone right down over time. But the actual cost of producing the shape of that boat hasn't gone down. So you'd expect with boat values to have gone down for the designs to have got simpler, and they haven't. In fact, the designs have got more complex. And we managed to achieve this by development of new materials, but only because we know we can throw those materials away. As soon as we can't throw those materials away, it gets more expensive. So I've got a plan in my head to do a 30-foot boat for rivers in the UK, aluminium hull, electric drive, selling price £30,000. I think this is possible. It would be very simple. And this would hark back to what people were actually marketing at a relatively similar price about 40 years ago. And so many of these boats were sold, because in the end, a cheap boat's a cheap boat. And people do almost anything for a cheap boat. So Lawrence, I mean, you've been selling boats around that length for $400,000 to $500,000, I think. Motorboats?
Yeah, around probably like 600. Yeah, around that price. Yeah.
Okay, so there's extra cost to bring it out here. An aluminium boat in seawater, well, we're on a winner there. We could probably, the electric motor and batteries is slightly more expensive than the diesel setup. If we diesel with HVO fuel, we had a simple toilet. In the end, when people have a boat in Hong Kong, after the, oh, wow, it looked good in the showroom, the boat could be almost anything. We just have to be willing to market it. And I think it's possible. We just need to, as an industry, start looking at these possibilities and see whether we can get there. I don't think anyone really has for years, because it's always been build a mold and throw it away. Annie, do you have anything from this? I mean, you work for the biggest boat builder in the world. Or has he gone away? He's got bored and gone away.
Still muted.
Yeah.
I can unmute him.
Actually, I wanted to ask a bit about like electric engines. I know it's still
I'm
sort of
sorry, guys. I'm here.
Oh.
I was just trying to have my screen. It went black because of some poor connection with my cable. No worries. But so I was trying to unmute, but wasn't able to do it. Yeah.
So I mean, I think the only so I think what Beneteau does is it aims to produce about 200 of any particular model. It will do about 8 to 10 molds to do that, and then it moves on to the next model. It's something like that, I think.
Yeah. So for each model, usually on average, we build with for each model, it's around 70 to 80 or 90 units.
Oh, much more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, depending, of course, of the size and so on.
And
how many? And every 250, 300, we change the mold.
And how many molds would you build to produce a production run of 70 boats?
It depends. It really depends of the model. For the very successful one, we can have 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
But now what we try to do, and this is something that's going in your direction, because what we try to do is to have much more agile factories where we are able to build different type of boats in the same plant. So we are able to switch from one mold to another, and we have with that much more flexibility. So we lose less resin, we lose, of course, less time, we use less electricity, energy, and so on. So when we are talking about sustainability at the group level, we want first to say, we don't talk straight about the boat, so the final product, but we talk usually about the way we are producing the boat. And we try to be as green as possible in the production process, rather than on the boat itself.
Well, what happens to those boats when they get to 30 years? I think it's a change.
Yeah, exactly. And I have a question, because in France, as you said, but I'm not sure if I have understand clearly, because in France, you have this technical control every 2 years, no matter if your car is new or 10 years old or 15 years old. And at some point, there is someone who will tell you, look, your car is now too old, not working well, is not good for use anymore. You should get rid of it. And then you have an ecosystem around that, of course, because you have people that will come and will take your car and destroy your car and so on and so on. And you have to pay for that. And I'm thinking that if we do the same for a boat, if someone from the government, from the administration, from a body is telling you, no, sorry, sir, but your boat, parking in Antibes, parking in Italy, in Hong Kong, is now too old, you have to get rid of this boat. You have to throw it away. Maybe we could also create this kind of business and economy at the end of the day, that someone will invest in the process of dismantling a boat.
But very, very difficult, because when we dismantle a car, so I'm not sure you're aware, but in the EU law for about 15 years now, cars have to be able to be taken back by the manufacturer after 10 years. Now, someone doesn't want to give it to the manufacturer. I can't remember, I think it's been a period from 10 years to 15 years old. Someone doesn't want to give it to the manufacturer, that's up to them. It's not manufacturer's responsibility. Manufacturer has to take it back. So, for example, I saw a very interesting thing from a VW executive, and they say, well, for example, with the Golf, you buy a brand new Golf now, you might have a dashboard from a car that's 17 years old, because it's the same molding.
Right.
And they put it back in, give it a quick flash, because they are standard plastics, they can remold that plastic in the same original mold, and it pops out again and it looks new. When no attempt is made to do this with boats, because every boat, there's very little commonality of parts. And even for the biggest boat built in the world, Beneteau, it would be very difficult to do commonality of parts in the boat structure. And of course, the cheapest way to build a boat is not to make it dismantleable. That's much more expensive. But if we build aluminium boats, we wouldn't care, because the boat's worth something. In fact, the boat's worth a lot of money in its material.
Yeah, and today it worth a lot. I can tell you, the kilogram of aluminium worth a lot. Yes.
But you have to create a market for it.
Yeah, we have to create. I have another question. I see some company builders, manufacturers trying to let's say, to sell this, what we call the green bashing, promoting a boat, a certain type of model, like it was the ultimate green model, because you have solar panel, because you use hydro energy, because you use, but it's also wrong, and it's also mistaken the client, and it's also telling something that is totally false to the client, because it's not because you have a solar panel, or it's not because you use hydrogen that your boat is green. It's, you know what I mean? So at some point, we have also to be super careful in the way we are promoting our eco-friendly vessels.
Yeah, there's been lots of greenwashing going around. I was involved in one of these a few years ago. So this guy built these catamarans up in China, and they put all these solar panels on it and said, "Look, our boat can run off solar." They were very, very, very horrible boats. In his attention to get solar on board the boats, he'd never considered making the boat efficient. Because actually he wanted to say, I can run the boat off solar. There we are, we don't tick all the boxes, we can sell this. Similarly, there's also been a couple of builders in Europe now building boats using a new fiber. Oh, this fiber is green because it's made by volcanoes as opposed to from glass. Oh, come off it. What are you going to do at the end of that boat's life? You're going to add that chemical, extract the fiber and reuse it? Or are you going to attack it with a chainsaw? Well, it's not going to be in that great place. It's going to be attacked with a chainsaw. So again, I think these are brave indeed.
I have a question actually for Vianney, because I was thinking with the new carbon emission targets in Europe that have just been announced, this actually might be have quite an impact on you guys building in France. So, and along with the ESG and everything else that is really sort of taking hold at the moment in terms of regulations, are you making changes to your production process or any other considerations already as a result of this?
Yeah, it's a big question, and it's a big challenge for us, Louise. And you're totally right. Actually, we had to close the factories because of that, because the investment we had to do to try to renew or to adapt our factories was way too high instead of creating a new plant, if I may say. So it's at some points it's a little bit also a bit crazy, because you have to close plants and then to build another one. So where is the green things there too? You know what I mean? So sometimes it's just the challenge you have to decide, okay, whether either I go and I try to renew and to inject a few million euros to try to adapt the plants in compliance with the French regulation or the European regulation, or I close it and someone will buy it, someone will do something else, and we reopen another one somewhere else. And we had to do the choice, and our CEO, Jérôme Demestre, has to take his choice a couple of months ago. Actually, that's why you saw on the news sometimes that Beneteau is closing 1 or 2 factories, and we had exactly the same in the US.
Yep.
So yes, Louise, it's a huge topic at the group level. Yeah.
And it just shows how complicated the whole issue is, because it's not just the design of the boats, but it's the manufacturing process, and the sourcing of materials, and all of that as well.
And when you are building, let's say 6,000 or 7,000 yachts a year from 5 meters up to 35 meters, you also have to consider what kind of pressure you're gonna put to your suppliers. And if you ask them tomorrow, look, now I want to have a fiber boat made with the bamboo things. No, sorry, but economically it's not going to work. Impossible.
Or you could do this. You could build boats out of steel. That's my boat.
Okay, so I think we just lost a couple of market share here.
I like it, Simon. I like it.
Yeah, but the point is, it's a riverboat. And when we're building boats for the sea, we have to look very carefully about how we could design it. But it's not impossible. Richard, you remember, who's that famous designer of steel sailing boats? And so many of his boats were built.
Bruce Roberts.
Bruce Roberts. His designs still sail. People
I
still
sail one. What you talking about? I still sail one.
Yeah, exactly. The boats had an amazingly long life, and they're fully recyclable. The thing about the steel boats is that this boat's 60 foot long. Its construction cost, the hull, the shell, not the fitting out, not the engines, was £32,000. This is very, very cheap for such a large boat. So it is definitely possible with the material, with the method, to build a fully recyclable boat at a cheap price. I agree, your Beneteau is not going to sell this design. But
it's feasible technically, and I'm sure we have a couple of engineers and designers that are able to do so.
I'm sure.
But when you have a listed company, you know the issue. Then you know the reality. So if you don't have a body that will impose and force you to put in place or to implement or to do, then
it's not going to happen. Yeah. I think one good starting point for all of this would be to actually declare or have declared on any production boat what its energy value is. God knows how you produce such a figure, but so people can compare.
How much energy to heat it or cool it?
Energy value to build it, to produce it.
And then, energy input to produce it,
Yeah.
So, for example, for steel and fiberglass, it's very similar. It's about 2 tons of carbon dioxide per ton. Quite similar. But at the end of its life, the steel boat, we can reuse the steel, and the fiberglass boat we carve up. Aluminium is about 4, but we will recover a lot more of the aluminium. And we have the advantage of a much longer longevity in seawater. I mean, there's some stunning aluminium designs coming now out of France, Upton in the UK, for example, their new Explorer yachts, really quite stunning things. And of course, the Dutch have been building these massive super yachts out of aluminium and steel for many, many years. So even simplistic designs like this, Vianney, you're quite right to laugh at it. It's not a product for Beneteau. Beneteau is never going to build boats for the inland waterways in the UK. But Beneteau could build steel aluminium boats and be certain that the boats are fully repairable throughout all of their life. There's boats of this type of design floating around in the UK, which are well over 100 years old and are well maintained and in use. But how do we sell it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
because it's not a financial argument, because these boats are cheaper to build than fiberglass boats. I just don't know how to market it. Very different.
And actually, a couple of years ago, we also stopped the production of our in our CNB shipyards in Bordeaux of the aluminium boats that was dedicated for the fishing companies or for the maritime police, for the Coast Guard and so on, the French Coast Guards and French Navy, and we stopped that because of the fiber and the cost of producing a boat in aluminium rather than in fiberglass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. But still would have been competitive, but it's problematic with the design, problematic with the finishes.
Yeah.
So it's a big thing. I don't know where to go. I just hope that some of the ideas we presented in this paper can be taken on by people who actually got more of a chance of affecting the world. What I was disappointed by was that the Environmental Committee of ICOMIA just felt it should be rejected out of hand. That just no one even made a response. In fact, they laughed at me because I wasn't trying to ban plastic straws, because that's what they think environmental protection is. It's very disappointing.
But I think Vianney's comments also highlights the complexity of the issues here in terms of, it's not just in terms of the industry educating the customer. It's actually all of the stakeholders, which involves the shareholders of the larger companies and everything else, which again really involves more of the environmental social governance, the ESG, which is actually coming into force. So perhaps that will help going forward as well. There's a lot more push and drive on directors and boards to follow environmental rules a lot more closely. So there's an education process required there as well.
Huge education process, and if we compare again with the car industry, which normally we said that they have 20 or 30 years, they are ahead of us. Look with the scandal we got from Volkswagen and what happened to them a couple of years ago, trying to shit on the result they got from the carbon emission. So it's.
But do we need government to get involved here? Is this the issue? Do we need to start putting this to governments to help on regulations?
And also, Simon, for the ICOMIA, I'm not too surprised because who are the sponsor of ICOMIA? The boat builders.
Yeah, indeed. One of the biggest sponsors, of course, is indeed the composites industry. Well, if any of you have ever been to Metz and you wander around, you'll find that there's a special hall for the composites industry, which consists of people exhibiting for the composites industry and 3 staff from Metz, because no one else goes there because no one else gives a toss. So yes, there's a lot of money tied up in this. I mean, it's certainly possible. I just pulled up this site, Bestware. I'm sure people are familiar with this company. Let me just share this. And this is an aluminium boat. It's made in the Netherlands. This is the 45, 450,000 euros. Stunning boat. Really very, very pretty. So it can be done. The price is not outrageous. And it's a very pretty boat. But I don't know how we actually end up getting this.
So during your presentation, Simon, I was asking myself if I can share this your presentation and the record of this the video to the product marketing team, just as for information. This is what HKBIA is doing, and this is what we are we have had as a presentation for the information, just to have a look at what's happening also in this part of the world. So typically the guys in my group who are designing Janos, Prestige, Benettos, Antares, and other boats, just for them to have this kind of overview of this.
I'd be very, very happy to do that.
Okay.
I will be at Metz in November. I'm also very happy to come and discuss these ideas. Getting one major boat builder starting to talk about it will end up with all the other boat builders talking about it. And the thing about Bestware and Axen and these other guys, they're selling higher than the market, a different style of boat. There's that very famous French builder of cruising aluminium catamarans.
Yeah, Alubat. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. And there's another one which does there's monohulls, which they always advertise as being sailing past Tahiti or something. So there's lots of local examples, but none of these guys have ever scaled up. So they've never had that big market. It'd be really, really fascinating to see a big builder actually grab this and say, actually, we're going to build recyclable boats, and just challenge everybody. You know, why don't you build a recyclable one? Rather than saying, I'm going to develop a recyclable process, which I might use in 10 years' time. At the moment, I really feel that, you know, we're Nero, we're fiddling while Rome burns, rather than actually doing something. And it's interesting to hear your comments of you wanting to show it on, which is, please, welcome. And just hearing how bored people were with the concept, but now actually floated it up around the people at ICOMIA. But there we go.
Cool. I just want to add that I think the government in Hong Kong are aware of the benefits of aluminium and steel boats over fiberglass. They've shifted away from fiberglass boats, and they're buying a lot of aluminium boats now for the reasons why it's easier to repair. They don't have to worry about the end of life of the boat. So I think these kind of topics can be raised, and I think when the opportunity comes, we can raise this up to the Marine Department so that perhaps in the future they could incentivize people to have aluminium boats in Hong Kong. Perhaps there's no tax in Hong Kong for boats, so it might be difficult to do that. Or maybe there's some other ways that the government can support it.
Priority for moorings. There's a very easy one, isn't it?
Yeah.
If your boat is actually made out of recyclable materials, we'll give you a mooring in aluminium. And if you build your boat out of fiberglass, you can moor it in Guangdong province. That would fix it, wouldn't it? Cost the government nothing.
Yeah. Cool.
Strange incentive.
All right. I think I guess we can close it up for today.
Really good, Simon. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Simon. It's been a real pleasure for you to give us this talk, and it's been really enlightening. And so, for those that wants to get the paper, it's on our website already, and I think you can always contact Simon when he's free. And once again, I just wanted to thank Simon on behalf of the association for co-founding the association, being the first chair, and setting this all up. And thank you for all of your guidance throughout these years. It's been amazing.